A young boy stood nervously at the counter of a small gift shop, clutching a handful of crumpled dollar bills. His shoes were worn, his jacket patched, but his eyes gleamed with determination. He had one mission: to buy a gift for his mother. The shopkeeper, glancing at the meager amount on the counter, sighed and began shaking his head. The boy's heart sank, but just then, the faint chime of the doorbell caught everyone's attention. It was Keanu Reeves. Before we dive into this heartwarming story of kindness, resilience, and unexpected twists, make sure to hit that subscribe button and stay with us till the end. This one will truly restore your faith in humanity. The boy turned, his wide eyes locking onto the actor who had just stepped in. Keanu looked casual, almost blending into the crowd, yet there was an undeniable presence about him. He noticed the boy immediately, the defeated slump of his shoulders, and the disapproving expression on the shopkeeper's face. Without hesitation, Keanu walked over. "What's the matter, champ?" Keanu asked, his voice calm yet reassuring. The boy hesitated, clutching the small ceramic figure of a mother holding her child that he had picked out. I want to get this for my mom," he mumbled. "It's her birthday, but I don't have enough money." Keanu glanced at the figurine, then at the shopkeeper. The tension in the air was palpable. The shopkeeper opened his mouth to speak, but Keanu raised his hand slightly, stopping him. "You know," Keanu said, crouching down to the boy's level, "when I was your age, I saved every penny to buy my mom a little charm for her bracelet. It wasn't much, but it meant the world to her. Gifts don't have to be big or expensive to show love. This one," he pointed at the figurine, "is perfect." The boy's eyes sparkled with hope, but the shopkeeper interrupted. "Perfect or not, it's $25, and he's barely got $10. Keanu stood up, his usual calm demeanor shifting slightly. There was a firmness in his voice as he said, "Well, maybe the world needs more people who see the value of things beyond just money." The shopkeeper looked flustered but stayed silent. Keanu then reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and placed a crisp $50 bill on the counter. "Consider the extra your tip for holding such meaningful items," he said with a small smile. The boy was ecstatic, clutching the figurine as though it was the greatest treasure he'd ever held. But as Keanu turned to leave, something unexpected happened that no one saw coming. As Keanu turned to leave, the boy suddenly grabbed his sleeve. "Wait!" he exclaimed, his voice filled with urgency. Keanu paused, his eyes softening as he turned back toward the boy. The shopkeeper looked curious now, leaning slightly over the counter to see what the boy was about to say. Everyone in the store seemed to hold their breath. "Why did you do that?" the boy asked, his tiny hand still clutching the figurine tightly. "You don't even know me." Keanu crouched down again, this time taking a moment before he replied. "Because kindness can change someone's whole day, or maybe their whole life. And sometimes, we all just need someone to believe in us." The boy's lips trembled, his emotions threatening to overflow. But before he could respond, the shopkeeper, who had been silently observing, suddenly said, "You're Keanu Reeves, aren't you?" A murmur rippled through the small shop. Keanu gave a humble smile but said nothing, his silence almost confirming the shopkeeper's question. The shopkeeper's demeanor shifted. He wasn't indifferent anymore. Instead, a flicker of guilt crossed his face. "You're right," the shopkeeper muttered, his voice softer now. "Sometimes we forget what really matters." He reached into the cash register and pulled out the $50 bill Keanu had handed him. "Here," he said, pushing it back across the counter. "This one's on me." The boy looked at Keanu, confused. But Keanu placed a hand on the boy's shoulder and smiled. "See? Kindness spreads." The boy turned to the shopkeeper, his small voice quivering with gratitude. "Thank you, sir. My mom is going to love this." But just as the boy was about to leave, the door to the shop swung open again. A man in a dark coat walked in, his face stern and his eyes scanning the room. He moved directly toward Keanu, ignoring everyone else. "You need to leave now," the man said in a low voice. "They're outside, and it's not safe." Keanu straightened, his relaxed demeanor vanishing in an instant. His eyes darted toward the window, where a couple of black SUVs were now parked. The boy followed his gaze, his curiosity turning to worry. "Who's outside?" the boy asked, clutching the figurine closer. Keanu didn't answer immediately. Instead, he reached into his pocket and handed the boy a small card. "If you ever need anything, call this number. And remember, no matter what happens, you're braver than you think." Before anyone could say another word, Keanu followed the man in the dark coat toward the back exit of the store. The boy and the shopkeeper exchanged bewildered looks. But as Keanu disappeared, the shopkeeper noticed something odd. On the counter, beneath the figurine's box, was another slip of paper. He picked it up and read it, his hands trembling slightly. It was a handwritten note that simply said, "Kindness has a ripple effect. Pass it on." The boy, unaware of the note, turned toward the door to leave, but not before a loud commotion erupted outside. Tires screeched, and muffled voices shouted orders. Something wasn't right. The boy froze in his tracks as the commotion outside grew louder. He peeked through the shop window, his small hands trembling against the glass. The black SUVs were now surrounded by men in dark suits, all talking into their earpieces, their movements precise and coordinated. "Stay away from the window, kid," the shopkeeper said, pulling him gently back. His voice, though firm, had a protective undertone. "But what's going on?" the boy asked, his curiosity mixed with fear. The shopkeeper didn't have an answer, but the air felt heavy with tension. Suddenly, the back door of the shop slammed open, and the man in the dark coat reappeared, his expression grim. "We need to lock this place down," he said, pulling out his phone and typing rapidly. "Lock down? What are you talking about?" the shopkeeper demanded. The man glanced at the boy, then back at the shopkeeper, his jaw tightening. "You don't understand who Keanu Reeves really is, do you?" The boy and the shopkeeper exchanged puzzled looks. "He's an actor," the boy said, his voice uncertain. The man's lips twitched, almost as if he wanted to laugh, but there was no humor in his eyes. "He's much more than that," he said cryptically. Before anyone could press further, the glass of the shop's front window shattered with a deafening crash. A metal canister rolled across the floor, releasing a thick cloud of smoke. The boy screamed, dropping the figurine, while the shopkeeper stumbled backward, coughing. The man in the dark coat acted quickly, pulling a small device from his jacket. With a flick of his wrist, he pressed a button, and a hidden panel in the shop's wall slid open, revealing a narrow staircase leading downward. "Downstairs now," he barked, ushering the boy and shopkeeper toward the hidden passage. "But what about Keanu?" the boy cried, tears streaming down his face as the smoke thickened around them. "He'll handle it," the man said, his tone unwavering. "Trust me, kid, he's handled worse." The shopkeeper grabbed the boy's hand, guiding him down the stairs as the man followed, sealing the hidden door behind them. The noise from above was muffled now, but the boy could still hear the chaos. Shouting voices, heavy footsteps, and the unmistakable sound of something crashing. They reached the bottom of the staircase, finding themselves in what looked like an old wine cellar. The boy clung to the shopkeeper, his small body shaking with fear. "What's happening? Why are they after him?" The man in the dark coat crouched down, looking the boy directly in the eyes. "Keanu's not just an actor," he said, his voice low and steady. "He's part of something bigger, something most people can't even imagine. And now, because of what you saw, so are you." The boy's eyes widened, his fear mingling with a spark of curiosity. "What do you mean? What did I see?" The man hesitated, glancing at the shopkeeper as if deciding how much to reveal. "Let's just say the world isn't what you think it is. And Keanu Reeves? He's one of the few people fighting to keep it that way." Before the boy could ask more, a faint buzzing sound filled the room. The man pulled out his phone, his face tightening as he read a message. "They're inside," he muttered. The boy's heart pounded as the man stood, his hand moving toward his jacket. "Stay behind me," he ordered, his tone leaving no room for argument. The shopkeeper and the boy huddled together, their breaths shallow as footsteps echoed above. The boy glanced at the figurine still clutched in his hand, its delicate features illuminated by the dim cellar light. And then the cellar door creaked open. The footsteps descending into the cellar were slow and deliberate, each one amplifying the tension in the air. The boy held his breath, clutching the shopkeeper's arm. The man in the dark coat stood in front of them, his stance rigid, his hands still inside his jacket. When the shadow of the intruder came into view, it wasn't what any of them expected. "Keanu?" the boy whispered, his voice trembling. Standing at the bottom of the staircase was Keanu Reeves himself. But he wasn't the calm and approachable figure the boy had seen earlier. His face was tense, his usually kind eyes sharp and focused. He carried himself with an air of authority that seemed almost otherworldly. "You're safe," Keanu said, his voice steady but urgent. He scanned the room, his eyes briefly landing on the boy before turning to the man in the dark coat. "How much do they know?" "Not much," the man replied. "But we need to move. Now." Keanu nodded and turned back to the boy. "What's your name, kid?" "Jake," the boy stammered, still clutching the figurine. "Jake, you're about to see things you won't understand, but you have to trust me. Can you do that?" Keanu's tone was firm but not unkind, his gaze locking with the boy's. Jake nodded slowly, unable to find his voice. "Good," Keanu said. He turned to the shopkeeper. "You too. This isn't just about me anymore. They've seen too much." The shopkeeper looked as if he wanted to argue but thought better of it. "What do you need us to do?" Keanu walked to the far end of the cellar, where an old, dusty wine rack stood against the wall. He pressed his hand against one of the bottles, and with a faint click, the rack slid aside, revealing another hidden passage. "Through here," he said. "It leads to a safe house. I'll cover you until you're inside." Jake hesitated, his eyes darting between Keanu and the hidden passage. "Why are they after you? What did you do?" Keanu crouched down to Jake's level, his expression softening just a fraction. "Sometimes, doing the right thing makes you a target. There are people who don't want the truth to come out, and I've made it my job to protect it." "But you're just an actor," Jake said, his voice barely above a whisper. Keanu's lips twitched into a small, almost sad smile. "Not everything is what it seems, Jake." Before Jake could ask more, the faint sound of shouting echoed from above. The man in the dark coat drew a weapon from his jacket, his movements precise and practiced. "They're coming. We need to go." Keanu straightened, his face hardening again. He guided Jake and the shopkeeper toward the hidden passage. "Stay together. Keep moving, no matter what you hear." "But what about you?" Jake asked, his voice filled with worry. "I'll catch up," Keanu promised. "Just go." As Jake and the shopkeeper disappeared into the darkness of the passage, Keanu turned back toward the staircase. The faint light from the cellar cast a long shadow across his face, highlighting the determination in his eyes. The first figure appeared at the top of the stairs, a man in tactical gear, his weapon drawn. Keanu stepped forward, his movements fluid and deliberate, as if this was far from his first time facing such danger. Jake, glancing back from the passage, caught one last glimpse of Keanu before the wine rack slid back into place, sealing them off. "Will he be okay?" Jake whispered to the shopkeeper, his heart pounding in his chest. The shopkeeper didn't answer, but the look in his eyes was heavy with uncertainty. As the passage stretched on, Jake couldn't shake the feeling that whatever was happening was far bigger than him, or even Keanu Reeves. And in that moment, he realized one thing. Life as he knew it was never going to be the same. The safe house wasn't what Jake had imagined. Instead of a dark, cold hideout, it was a well-lit underground space, complete with walls lined with bookshelves, comfortable furniture, and even a small kitchen in one corner. It felt oddly inviting, almost like stepping into someone's secret home rather than a refuge from danger. Jake looked around, his curiosity warring with the fear still pounding in his chest. "What is this place?" he asked the shopkeeper, his voice barely above a whisper. The The shopkeeper shook his head, still catching his breath. I don't know, kid. This is way beyond anything I've ever been part of. Before Jake could press further, a voice broke the silence. Good. You made it. They both turned to see the man in the dark coat stepping through another concealed entrance. His face was calm but his movements deliberate, as though he'd done this 100 times. Where's Keanu? Jake blurted out, taking a step forward. The man gave him a reassuring nod. He'll be fine. He's dealt with worse. But there was something in his tone, something that didn't quite match the confidence of his words. Jake clenched the figurine in his hands, the weight of it suddenly feeling heavier. What's going on? Why are they after him? Why are we involved? The man sighed, removing his coat and draping it over a chair. You're involved because you happen to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or, he paused, looking at Jake closely. Maybe the right place, depending on how you see it. Jake frowned, his frustration boiling over. Stop talking in riddles. Just tell me what's going on. The man exchanged a glance with the shopkeeper, then crouched down to Jake's level. Listen, kid. You know Keanu Reeves, right? The guy you see in movies? Kind, humble, always helping people. Jake nodded, gripping the figurine tighter. Well, he's all that, sure. But he's also part of something much bigger, something most people don't know about. And today you stumbled into it. What something? Jake asked, his voice cracking slightly. The man hesitated, then leaned in closer, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Keanu's not just an actor. He's part of a group that protects people. People who can't protect themselves. The figurine you bought is not just a figurine. It's a message. A signal to someone we've been trying to reach for years. Jake's eyes widened as he stared at the small, unassuming object in his hands. A message? For who? The man stood up, running a hand through his hair. That's the part we don't know yet. But whoever it is, they're important enough that people are willing to kill to keep this from happening. The words hung heavy in the air. Jake looked down at the figurine, his mind racing. It looked so ordinary, so innocent. How could it possibly be connected to something so dangerous? Does Keanu know? Jake asked quietly. The man smiled faintly. Oh, he knows. He's known for a long time. That's why he's out there right now, making sure we're safe. But what if something happens to him? Jake's voice was small, his fear for Keanu growing stronger by the second. The man placed a hand on Jake's shoulder. Keanu's not just anyone. Trust me, he's prepared for this. Right now, we need to focus on figuring out the next step. Before Jake could respond, the sound of a faint alarm echoed through the safe house. The man's face hardened instantly, and he reached for a concealed weapon beneath the table. They've found us, he muttered. Jake's heart sank. The comfort of the safe house vanished in an instant, replaced by the suffocating weight of danger closing in around them. What do we do now? The shopkeeper asked, his voice trembling. The man glanced at Jake, then at the figurine in his hands. Now we run. The room erupted into motion as the hidden entrance burst open. Jake barely had time to react before the man grabbed his arm and pulled him toward another concealed door. As they fled deeper into the labyrinth of tunnels, Jake's mind raced with questions. Who was the message meant for? Why was Keanu willing to risk so much? And most importantly, how much longer could they keep running before everything came crashing down? Whatever the answers were, Jake knew one thing for certain. This was far from over. The tunnel was a maze of twisting passages, dimly lit by flickering bulbs that barely pushed back the oppressive darkness. Jake stumbled as the man pulled him along, his heart pounding louder than their hurried footsteps. The shopkeeper lagged behind, wheezing with every step. Keep up, the man barked, his grip on Jake's arm tightening as they rounded another corner. Jake clutched the figurine to his chest, its smooth surface now slick with sweat. Where are we going? He managed to ask between gasps for air. Somewhere they won't find us, the man replied curtly. The sound of footsteps echoed in the distance behind them. Jake glanced over his shoulder and caught a glimpse of shadows darting across the walls. His stomach twisted in fear. They're close, the shopkeeper wheezed, clutching his side. The man stopped abruptly, spinning around to face them. "We need to split up," he said, his voice firm. "It's the only way to throw them off." Jake's eyes widened in alarm. "What? No. I can't." "You can," the man interrupted, crouching to look Jake in the eyes. His voice softened just enough to break through Jake's panic. "You've already proven you're braver than most. Now, take this." He pressed a small device into Jake's free hand. A sleek, black cylinder with a single red button. "What is it?" Jake asked, his voice trembling. "A signal beacon," the man explained. "If you get into trouble, press it. Keanu will find you." Jake swallowed hard, the weight of the device heavy in his palm. "What about you?" The man stood up, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his lips. "Don't worry about me. Just keep moving and don't stop for anything. Head toward the main tunnel, then take the third exit on your left. There's a safe house there." Before Jake could protest, the man turned to the shopkeeper. "You're with me. We'll lead them away." The shopkeeper looked as though he wanted to argue but thought better of it. Instead, he nodded grimly and adjusted his glasses. "Go, kid," the man said, giving Jake a final push forward. "And remember, don't lose that figurine. It's the key to everything." Jake hesitated for a moment, fear and uncertainty rooting him in place. But the sound of boots pounding against the concrete snapped him out of his paralysis. He turned and ran. The tunnels seemed endless, each turn looking identical to the last. Jake's breath came in ragged gasps, his legs burning with the effort to keep going. He tried to focus on the man's instructions. Main tunnel, third exit, but the panic swirling in his chest made it hard to think. Behind him, the distant shouts of their pursuers grew louder. He skidded to a halt at an intersection, his eyes darting between the passages. "Left," he whispered to himself. He said third on the left. He bolted down the corridor, his heart leaping when he spotted a faintly illuminated doorway ahead. He reached it just as the shouts behind him grew deafeningly close. Jake threw himself through the doorway, slamming it shut and fumbling for a lock. His fingers found a heavy iron bolt, and he shoved it into place just as the first set of fists pounded against the other side. "Open up," a voice snarled. Jake backed away from the door, clutching the figurine and the beacon tightly. His mind raced, desperate for a way out. Then he saw it. A narrow passage at the back of the room, hidden behind a row of shelves. It was barely wide enough to squeeze through, but it was better than waiting for the door to give way. He slipped into the passage, his breath hitching as the walls closed in around him. The pounding on the door grew louder, accompanied by the splintering sound of wood starting to give. Jake didn't look back. The passage twisted and turned, the light fading with every step. Just when he thought he couldn't go any further, the walls opened up into a larger chamber. And there, standing in the middle of the room, was Keanu Reeves. He was battered and bruised, his clothes torn and streaked with dirt. But his eyes were sharp, and the determination on his face was unmistakable. "Jake," Keanu said, his voice calm despite the chaos. "You made it." Jake's knees nearly gave out in relief. "They're right behind me," he stammered. "I don't know how much time we have." Keanu nodded, stepping forward and placing a steadying hand on Jake's shoulder. "You did good, kid. Now let's finish this." Before Jake could respond, the faint hum of machinery filled the chamber. He turned to see a hidden wall sliding open, revealing a room filled with advanced equipment and a team of people working frantically at consoles. "Welcome to the real fight," Keanu said, his voice low but resolute. The hidden chamber was like stepping into another world. Rows of monitors flickered with streams of data, casting a cold blue glow over the room. A diverse team of men and women worked with military precision, their faces tense but focused. Jake's eyes darted from one screen to another, trying to make sense of the rapid movements and cryptic symbols flashing before him. Keanu led him forward, his hand steady on Jake's shoulder. The room quieted slightly as heads turned, and whispers rippled through the air. "Is that him?" one of the workers murmured. "The boy with the artifact," another whispered back. Jake felt the weight of their stares, a mixture of curiosity and hope that made his stomach churn. He tightened his grip on the figurine, unsure of what to say or do. Keanu stopped in front of a large table in the center of the room, its surface covered with blueprints, maps, and scattered notes. A woman with sharp eyes and a commanding presence stepped forward. "Reeves," she said, nodding briskly. Then her gaze fell on Jake. "This is the boy?" Keanu nodded. "This is Jake. He has the artifact." The woman studied him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then she extended a hand. "I'm Commander Ellis. Welcome to the Resistance, Jake." Jake hesitated before shaking her hand. "Resistance?" he echoed, his voice barely above a whisper. Ellis glanced at Keanu, then back at Jake. "We don't have much time, so I'll keep it simple. That figurine you're holding isn't just a piece of art. It's a key, literally and figuratively. It contains encrypted data, the last remnants of a system we've been trying to restore for years." Jake frowned, looking down at the figurine. "I don't understand. What kind of system?" "A system that can expose everything," Keanu interjected. His voice was calm but carried an edge that made Jake's heart skip a beat. "Corruption, hidden operations, the exploitation of people like your mom, Jake." Jake's breath caught in his throat. "My mom?" Keanu crouched slightly to meet his gaze. "The reason she's working so hard, why she can't catch a break. It's not just bad luck or hard times. There's a network of powerful people rigging the game, making sure families like yours stay at the bottom." Jake's hands trembled as he stared at the figurine. The weight of it suddenly felt overwhelming. "And this can stop them?" Ellis stepped in. "If we can decode it and access the data, yes. But the people chasing you know that too. That's why they'll stop at nothing to get it back." As if on cue, an alarm blared through the chamber. Red lights flashed, and the team sprang into action. "They've found us!" someone shouted from across the room. Ellis turned sharply to Keanu. "We need more time. Can you hold them off?" Keanu straightened, his expression hardening. "I'll buy you as much as I can." He turned to Jake, placing both hands firmly on the boy's shoulders. "Listen to me, Jake. You've already done more than anyone could have asked. But now you need to be brave again. Stay here with Ellis and her team. Protect that figurine at all costs. Understand?" Jake nodded, though his throat felt too tight to speak. Keanu smiled faintly, a glimmer of warmth breaking through his otherwise steely demeanor. "You've got this, kid." With that, he turned and headed toward the exit, his steps purposeful and unhurried despite the chaos around him. Jake watched him go, a mix of fear and awe swirling in his chest. For a moment he felt completely alone. But then Ellis's voice snapped him back to reality. "Jake!" she barked, pulling him toward the table. "We need your help. The encryption on this thing is like nothing we've ever seen before. Whatever you know about it, now's the time to tell us." Jake swallowed hard, his mind racing. He thought back to the shopkeeper's cryptic words, the strange symbols he'd noticed etched into the figurine's surface. Slowly, he placed it on the table. "I don't know much," he admitted, his voice shaky. "But I remember him saying it wasn't just a key. It's a map too." The room fell silent for a moment as Ellis and her team absorbed his words. Then, as if a switch had been flipped, they erupted into action. Cross-reference the symbols with the ancient scripts database. Run a simulation on the map theory. Jake stood there, watching the whirlwind of activity around him. For the first time, he felt a spark of hope. Maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. But as another explosion rocked the chamber, he realized their fight was far from over. The explosion rattled the walls, sending tremors through the floor. Jake stumbled, his heart hammering in his chest. He looked around, his eyes wide with fear, but everyone else in the room moved with practiced efficiency. Commander Ellis was already barking orders to her team, trying to maintain control as the chaos unfolded. "Keep moving. We need to get that data decoded now," Ellis shouted. Her voice was calm but laced with urgency. Jake's mind raced. He had no idea what was going on, but he knew one thing. He wasn't safe here. He couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching him, tracking his every move. The figurine felt heavier in his hands, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on him. As he stood frozen in place, Keanu's earlier words echoed in his mind. "You've got this, kid." Jake clenched his fists, determined not to let fear control him. The explosion hadn't just shaken the room. It had shattered his illusion of safety. He had a role to play now, whether he understood it fully or not. "Jake!" Ellis called, snapping him out of his thoughts. "We need you here. Help us crack this code. Every second counts." He nodded, stepping toward the table where the team was already working furiously. They were connecting wires, scanning the figurine with high-tech equipment, but nothing seemed to work. The screen in front of them displayed nothing but static, a swirling mess of encrypted symbols that didn't make sense. Come on. One of the team members muttered under their breath, furiously typing on a keyboard. Jake placed his hand on the figurine, suddenly struck by a strange urge to look at it differently. The figurine's symbols had been a blur of patterns before, but now they seemed to shimmer in a way he couldn't explain. "Wait," Jake said, his voice shaky but determined. "There's a pattern. It's not just random symbols. They're dates." The team paused, looking at him as if he'd just solved a puzzle they had been struggling with for hours. "Dates," Ellis repeated, narrowing her eyes. "What do you mean?" Jake traced a finger along the lines of the figurine. I think this is a timeline. These aren't just symbols. They're markers, moments in history, important moments, and they all seem to lead back to the same event." Ellis leaned over the table, her eyes scanning the figurine closely. "A timeline, that's it. But what event?" Jake's heart raced as he looked at the figurine again. "I think it's connected to my mom. There's a date here." He pointed at one symbol barely visible. "It matches a date from her past. I remember her telling me about it. A moment in time when everything changed for her." Ellis turned to one of the team members, her voice tight with urgency. "We need to cross-reference this." "Jake, you're saying your mom's connected to this timeline?" Jake nodded, his throat dry. "I don't know how, but I'm sure of it. This is about her. This isn't just about me." The tension in the room grew palpable as the team scrambled to process the new information. Jake could feel the weight of their eyes on him, and despite the fear, a sense of purpose began to form in his chest. His mom wasn't just another face in the system. She was at the heart of something bigger, something dangerous. Suddenly, the door to the chamber slammed open with a force that sent a shockwave through the room. The air crackled with tension, and every person in the room immediately froze. Keanu's voice rang out, calm but sharp. "They're here." The sound of footsteps echoed through the hallway outside. Heavy, deliberate steps that signaled the approach of a force far too powerful to ignore. Jake's stomach dropped. The realization hit him like a freight train. Whoever they were, they weren't just coming to steal the figurine. They were coming to end this fight before it even started. Ellis turned to the team, her voice low and urgent. "Prepare for a lockdown. We need to protect this data at all costs." But Jake didn't hear her. His eyes locked on the figurine, the symbols now glowing with an eerie light. The timeline was more than just dates. It was leading them somewhere that could change everything. "Jake," Keanu's voice cut through the chaos, pulling him back to reality. "We have to move. Now." Jake didn't hesitate. He grabbed the figurine, his mind racing. Whatever the event was, wherever this timeline was taking them, it was bigger than he had ever imagined. And the only way forward was to follow it, no matter the cost. As he moved with Keanu and Ellis toward the exit, the sound of approaching footsteps grew louder. The resistance team had already set up barriers, but Jake knew this was just the beginning. Whoever was on the other side of that door wouldn't stop until they had everything. And now they were in the fight of their lives. The door slammed shut behind them, the heavy thud reverberating through the narrow corridor. Keanu led the way, his movements sharp and deliberate, as if he had done this 1,000 times. Ellis followed close behind, her eyes darting around, scanning every corner as they rushed through the maze of underground tunnels. Jake clutched the figurine tightly, his grip sweating, as if it was the only thing anchoring him to this madness. "Where are we going?" Jake asked, his voice strained. He could feel his heart pounding in his chest, the adrenaline making it hard to focus. Keanu glanced over his shoulder, his face set in a determined expression. "We need to get you somewhere safe, but that figurine, it's the key. It's not just a relic, Jake. It's tied to everything." Jake's mind raced. He had no idea what Keanu was talking about, but he knew one thing for sure. If Keanu Reeves, a man who had always seemed larger than life, was taking him seriously, then this figurine was something far more dangerous than he could have ever imagined. Ellis suddenly stopped in her tracks, her hand shooting out to block the path. "This way," she hissed, motioning for them to take a sharp turn down a narrow passage. Her voice was low, barely a whisper, but there was no mistaking the urgency in it. They veered into the passage, their footsteps echoing in the silence. The narrow walls felt like they were closing in on them, and Jake could hear the sound of his breathing, rapid and shallow. Every second felt like a lifetime. "We don't have much time," Ellis murmured, her voice tight with fear. "They're tracking us. They've already breached the outer layer of security. It won't be long before they find us." Jake looked at her, his face a mixture of confusion and fear. "Who are they? What's going on?" Keanu spoke, his voice calm but carrying an undeniable weight. "There are forces at play here, Jake. Powerful ones. People who will stop at nothing to control that figurine." "But why me? Why now?" Jake's voice cracked, his confusion reaching its peak. He had never wanted anything to do with this world, this hidden side of life, and now he was thrown into the middle of it with no warning. Ellis turned to him, her face serious. "Because your mother was connected to it. She uncovered something years ago, something that was meant to stay buried. And you, Jake, you're the key to unlocking it. The figurine, the timeline, it's all connected to you." Jake's mind whirled. His mother had been part of something this big. How had he never known? Why had she never told him any of this? Every question he had was met with silence, the walls of confusion closing in tighter. "That timeline you discovered," Keanu added, his voice steady but urgent. "It's not just a record. It's a map of what's to come. A map that shows the rise of something dark, something no one can stop unless they act now." Jake felt the weight of those words settle over him like a blanket of dread. "And we have to stop it? How? I don't even know what we're up against." Keanu's gaze was steady, unwavering. "You don't have to know everything right now. What you need to understand is that we can't do this alone. We need the right people, the right resources. And that figurine, your mother knew how to use it. We have to decode it before they get their hands on it." Suddenly, the sound of footsteps came from behind them, growing louder. Jake's heart skipped a beat. The pursuit was getting closer. "Move!" Ellis barked, breaking into a sprint. "We need to reach the safe house. Now!" Keanu and Jake followed, the urgency in the air thickening as the sound of approaching footsteps grew. Jake's legs burned as they ran, adrenaline coursing through his veins. He was out of breath, but there was no time to stop. The hallway opened into a large, dimly lit room. Jake stopped in his tracks, his eyes scanning the space. It looked like a makeshift operation room, computers, old maps, scattered files. In the center of the room stood a massive steel door, and beyond it, Jake could sense that safety was close. But before they could make it to the door, a shadow stepped into the room. Jake froze, his blood running cold as he recognized the figure standing in front of them. It was the same man who had tried to stop them earlier, the man from the jet, the one who had blocked Keanu from boarding. His face was hidden behind a black mask, but Jake could see the cold, calculating eyes that bore into him. "You think you can run?" the man said, his voice low and threatening. "You can't escape this. Not with the figurine, not with what's coming." Jake felt the hairs on the back of his neck stand up. His hands trembled, and he instinctively stepped back. But Keanu stepped forward, his expression fierce. "We don't have a choice," Keanu said calmly, his eyes locked on the man. "You're not stopping us. The man's lips curled into a cruel smile. "We'll see about that." In a flash, the man lunged toward them, but Keanu was quicker. With a fluid motion, he disarmed the attacker, sending him crashing to the ground. Ellis wasted no time. She pressed a button on the wall, and the steel door slid open with a hiss. "Go now," Ellis shouted, her voice a sharp command. They ran through the door, the moment of confrontation still echoing in Jake's mind. What was this all about? Who were these people and why were they after him? Keanu gave him a quick glance as they rushed through the door. "You're not alone in this anymore, Jake. Whatever happens next, we face it together." But as the door slammed shut behind them, Jake had a feeling this was just the beginning. Something far worse was coming, and he wasn't sure if he was ready for it. As the heavy steel door locked behind them, the world outside felt like a distant memory. The safe house was quiet, too quiet. The only sounds were the echoes of their hurried footsteps and the mechanical hum of the security systems coming to life. Jake's mind raced, his heart still pounding from the chase. The figurine, his mother, and the strange men who were after them. It was all too much to process. Keanu led the way down a dimly lit hallway, his steps deliberate and confident, as if he had done this 100 times before. Ellis, still on edge, kept a watchful eye on their surroundings. Jake could barely keep up, his mind spinning with questions. But there was one thing that lingered more than any other. Why me? They reached a small room at the end of the hallway, its walls lined with monitors and blinking lights. A single desk sat in the center, cluttered with files, maps, and strange symbols that Jake didn't recognize. Keanu motioned for them to sit down. "Take a breath," Keanu said, his voice low but steady. "You're safe for now, but we have to move quickly. The people who are after you, they won't stop." Jake sank into a chair, his hands still shaking as he clutched the figurine. It felt warm in his palm, as if it was alive, almost pulsing with an energy he couldn't understand. His mother's words echoed in his mind. "Keep it safe. They'll come for it." "Who are they?" Jake finally asked, his voice tight with frustration. "What do they want from me?" "From my mom." Ellis paced the room, her hands clenched into fists. "They're a faction, a hidden group of powerful people who manipulate events, control systems, and pull the strings from the shadows. They want the figurine because it's the key to something much bigger, something that could change everything." Keanu sat down across from Jake, his gaze steady. "Your mother, she found something, Jake. Something that could expose them. But she didn't live long enough to finish what she started." Jake's mind reeled. His mother, the quiet, unassuming woman he'd known all his life, had been involved in something like this? It didn't make sense. But why did she keep it from me? Why didn't she tell me any of this? Ellis stopped pacing and turned to him. "Because she knew. She knew that once you were involved, there was no turning back. She didn't want you to have to carry this burden. She thought she could protect you by keeping you in the dark." Jake looked at the figurine in his hand. It seemed so small, so insignificant, yet the weight of its mystery felt like a mountain pressing down on him. He wanted to ask more, to demand answers, but the words got stuck in his throat. Keanu leaned forward, his voice steady. "This figurine is tied to a set of coordinates. Coordinates that lead to a place where an ancient technology lies buried. Your mother's research was close to unlocking its power, but she was targeted before she could reveal everything. Now it's up to you to finish what she started." Jake's mind was spinning. Coordinates? Ancient technology? His mother was involved in something far beyond what he could comprehend. He was just a normal guy. How could he be the one to carry this weight? "We can't let them get it," Keanu continued, his tone hardening. "If they get their hands on that technology, it's over. The balance of power will shift, and everything we know will be upended." Ellis stepped forward, her eyes meeting Jake's. "You're the only one who can stop them now. The figurine is the key. But we need to decode it before they do. And we need to do it quickly." Jake looked down at the figurine again, his grip tightening. It was more than just a simple object. It was a weapon, a piece of a puzzle he didn't understand. But now, it was the only thing standing between him and the people who wanted him. Keanu's voice cut through his thoughts. "We'll teach you what you need to know, but you have to trust us, Jake. This is bigger than anything you've ever imagined." For the first time since this nightmare began, Jake felt a flicker of understanding. He didn't know everything, but he knew one thing for sure. He couldn't turn back now. He had no choice but to see this through. Ellis moved to one of the monitors and began typing rapidly. "We need to figure out where the coordinates lead. We don't have much time." Keanu turned to Jake, his gaze unwavering. "It's going to be dangerous. They won't stop coming for you. But we're in this together. You're not alone anymore." Jake nodded, the weight of the responsibility settling into his chest. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but there was no going back. He had to do this. He had to uncover the truth and stop whatever dark forces were lurking in the shadows. The screen flickered to life, and Ellis spoke in a low voice, almost to herself. "We've got a location. It's in the middle of nowhere, but it's a start." Jake stood up, his legs unsteady but resolute. "What do we do now?" Keanu stood as well, his movements precise and calm. "We get ready. We prepare for what's coming. And we make sure that figurine never falls into the wrong hands." As they gathered around the screen, the tension in the room was palpable. The quiet hum of the monitors seemed to grow louder, each second dragging on, as if time itself was trying to warn them. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Jake's life would never be the same again, and whatever happened next, they had to face it together.